All right, so I'm joined right now by Mark Bankston, who represented Scarlett Lewis and Neil Heslin in their lawsuit against Alex Jones, which we covered on the Law and Crime Network. Mr. Bankston, great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So I have to ask you what it was like for you. Right before this trial, I covered the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. The attorneys there kind of became celebrities. Their moments became viral sensations. You had some very memorable moments in that courtroom. So having the spotlight on you, being a part of this case that everybody was watching, what was it like for you?
It was very surreal. It was already, I'd already gotten sort of used to the whole surreal nature of the case after a couple years spending that much time with Mr. Jones. But having this trial go down the way it did was very different. A lot of times as a lawyer, when you get out of trial, your email box is pretty full because you've been ignoring your work for a couple weeks. This time it was full of every media organization on the planet, a ton of fan mail, and more crazy people than you can shake a stick at sending me messages. It's been interesting, that's for sure.
Well, did you get hate mail from
Oh
Alex?
gosh, yes.
What was
Oh
that
yes.
like?
I mean, look, it's almost like I had a little bit of it going through the case every now and then. You'd get some sort of random comment after Mr. Jones or his lawyers would say something about me on air. But this was wholly new. And it was both, I think both I and my judge got a small taste of what my clients have experienced for the past 10 years. There were people threatening to kill us. There were people who have sent child pornography, child sexual abuse images to both me and my judge. It is really strange the people who've come out of the woodwork. I had a father who did criminal work for many years, and as a criminal defense lawyer, he would often run into this sort of thing. And you would see it sometimes on things like, drug cartel cases or mafia or something like that. But to see it come out of something this ridiculous, it was definitely a new experience. So I took a good week vacation from going home after the trial just because I didn't want anybody coming up and knocking on my door. But it has been a little bit of an insight into what my clients experienced. And to be honest, I'm sort of glad that some of the heat anyway has been deflected off of my clients and onto me and my law firm because we're a little more prepared to handle that. So, but it has been an extraordinary insight into exactly what InfoWars fans are capable of.
It's interesting you say that because, look, you were entirely professional throughout the process. There was a point when it felt during the arguments that this almost felt personal to you. When you
Mhm.
were delivering some of your arguments, there was an emotional aspect to it, and
Yeah.
really trying to hold Alex Jones and Infowars accountable. Is that how you felt?
Well, there's something I don't talk about too much publicly before the trial, but I do have this strange personal connection to this case. It's just out of a coincidence that my son, who is now 8 years old, was born on the same birthday as Noah Posner. And in fact, my son's first birthday, the day he was born, was the first birthday that Noah wasn't around. And it has caused a bond between me and my clients. Um, and then there's also the story of Jesse has hit me so personally. My son is a very gentle, sweet boy, and I know that if he had been in that classroom that day, he would have been one of the children that Jesse saved. I could never expect my child to do what Jesse did that day. Nobody should have to, and it did. It over 4 years, it has affected me pretty deeply. At one point when you first get these cases, it's okay, let's go after Alex Jones. Let's solve a mayhem agent in society. But as you get closer and closer to it, it became more about these plaintiffs for me, these families and what they've gone through, and the experience that as a younger man, I don't think I really understood when Sandy Hook happened in 2013, 2012. But now, as a father, yeah, it was really important and personal to me.
Yeah, and you know what it was too? Sandy Hook happened 10 years ago. People's attention spans change. Sadly, we've had a number of school shootings since then in recent history, but there was a part of it that when we were in the middle of the trial, to try to bring Jesse back and explain what happened that day and have people part of the conversation remember the impact of Sandy Hook. I think that was an important part of the trial too. I didn't know if you felt the same way. Having the media's attention back to this, obviously what Scarlett and Neil were going through, but just understanding how much of a hero Jesse was and having
Yeah.
that conversation, people understand that. And because 10 years ago, some people were much younger, didn't know about it. I think that was at least a benefit to having this story told once again. Did you feel the same way?
I did, and one of the things that I really noticed is we go back to when it happened. And I talked about this in opening. The whole country was collectively in shock about it. But now you look at, say, Uvalde, and it's like, okay, now we're used to it. And the conversation moves too quickly. So I do think there was some benefit into having that story told again, to have it be brought home to us again, what exactly happened there. And I think it was really important for Neil and Scarlett that for at least the past couple of years, if anybody was paying attention to them or Jesse, it's because they were hooked into this conspiracy theory. To have now Jesse's moment be done in such a national way in front of an audience like that, I really think it was not only beneficial for all of us, it was very beneficial for Neil and Scarlett as well.
And how are they doing right now after this?
They're doing great, actually. They feel like they've come out of a tunnel. They feel like they see light again. I think they now feel, and this is probably true, that other than the most crazy people on the fringes, nobody's really buying into this lie anymore. We have effectively stomped it out. And for them, they see a new future. They see a future that isn't clouded by Alex Jones. And they know that this signal that has gone out is something that they did. They came forward and were brave enough to do this suit. And by having this message sent out, they really feel like they've accomplished something. They feel like that it was already, Jesse had done so much for the kids in his own classroom. But now there's this feeling that Jesse's story has maybe helped the country at large. And for them, they're very proud of that. And actually just for standing up to Mr. Jones. I think for a lot of people, as you say, there was a lot of memorable moments in that courtroom. But for me personally, it was when Scarlett Lewis looked Alex Jones directly in the face and talked to him. That moment, I think,
what did you think of that? What did you think of that one?
I'd say the biggest thing that really stuck with me about that is that Scarlett was on the stand before the break, and Jones wasn't in the courtroom. And when he came in the courtroom after that break, I think that honestly is one of the biggest mistakes he made during the entire history of the litigation. Because when he sat down in front of Scarlett, it galvanized her. And she directly addressed him, looked him right in the eyes. And that moment of confrontation between her and him, that was one of the most important moments of the trial. It really showcased both Scarlett's strength and the amount that she has gone through. So to me, that I think is the memory that's always going to stick with me.
I want to get back to Scarlett and Neil in a minute, and also the damages award, because there's something that you mentioned that I think is interesting. Before that, though, let's just go back to Jones for a second. His behavior and demeanor during the course of this trial was the subject of a lot of speculation and analysis. What was your take on the way he was behaving during the course of the trial?
Well, it kind of connects back into the question that people ask me all the time, which is, does Alex Jones believe the things he says? And I used to think I understood the answer to that, which I had said for many, many years. No, not at all. I don't believe for a second that Mr. Jones believed that there were photos of the kids still alive. I don't believe that he ever thought that the school was shut down and not an operating school. I think he definitely was manipulating when he was doing that. But there's another wrinkle that I've learned after spending, 12 hours with them in deposition and now during this trial, and that is there is no off switch for Alex Jones. Whether he believes it or not, that's not the important part. The point is that he is not in control of himself. All that his defense needed is for him to come in and act like a normal human being for just a couple of days, and he could not do it. It's simply built into his DNA to be weird. And the amount of strange things he did in the trial certainly were noticed by the jury. That all sort of came to a head during his cross-examination, which is one of the most extraordinary and bizarre cross-examinations I've ever seen. You could not ask for a stranger witness on the stand to just face plant more completely than Jones did. And that was rewarding for me to see that. But what I thought was interesting is we talked to the jury afterwards, and for them, they said that the cross of Jones was relatively just a moment of entertainment, not really meaningful in the case, because they had already decided, they had already arrived and understood who they were. By the time they had seen his producer on the stand, his protege, Owen Schroyer, and then heard from Scarlett, they knew what was going on here. There was no new piece of information communicated to them there. But it was, I think, for the world, an important moment to see Jones falter in that way. He's not on his show. He's not in control. And when that happens, he's revealed for every bit of ridiculousness he has.
That's really interesting that apparently it did him no service whatsoever in their eyes for him to take this in. I mean, you were front and center, cross-examining Alex Jones. I'm sure you prepared a lot for that. What was it like to cross-examine the defendant in this case? who's, I guess, unlike anybody you've probably ever cross-examined.
Exactly.
What was that like?
Exactly. I mean, look, sometimes when you have a defendant that you know has done bad things, you look forward to that cross-examination to expose the bad things that they've done. Here, that wasn't really an issue because every bad thing that Jones has done was front and center for the jury. It was right out there. So it was really a hard decision in terms of legal strategy of exactly what to ask him. Ultimately, we came to the conclusion that you didn't want a long, drawn-out cross-examination. You needed to demonstrate to the jury that he wasn't taking this seriously. You put his extrajudicial comments in front of him, let him understand who he is outside of the courtroom. And then, of course, we had the ultimate trap for him. We knew that he was going to continue to lie about not having produced text messages and things that he was supposed to produce in the case. And so when we were in possession of those materials, it was a sort of a textbook way of how you set up a witness to commit and then confront them. And in doing so, it looks to me that Jones could be in some pretty hot water for what he said on the stand.
Do you think he should be brought up on perjury charges?
Definitely, I've recommended that. I currently, there are motions for sanctions against Jones and his attorneys, which are going to be heard fairly shortly by the court. But beyond that, yes, I have provided that material and gotten it all sorted out. And it's my intention to give that to the Travis County District Attorney. Perjury is a very difficult thing to prosecute. In most cases, you just have to accept, yes, this person lied, but there's no real way to prove that. Here, there's some different circumstances. And it's my belief that based on the record of what he testified to in trial, he did testify falsely. And I do believe that was with the intent to deceive. So under this situation, yeah, I think he could be looking at some hot water for that. Whether those actually go forward or whether that just ends up in sanctions, I don't know. But if I was Mr. Jones, I wouldn't be sleeping easy right now.
You mentioned the infamous moment. He calls it your Matlock moment.
That was the Perry Mason moment.
Perry Mason.
He got an entire generation of millennials to Google who Perry Mason was from that. So yeah, exactly.
How did you, when you got the text messages from, can you walk me through what your reaction was to that, how that unfolded?
I mean, my reaction is probably exactly what you expect it to be, is once you realize what has been provided. I mean, it is the biggest no way you've ever said in your life. It's you can't believe that this has happened. And what was interesting about that is once I gave the notice to them that they produced it and that we were in the process of downloading all this stuff and it was starting to fill up our server. And, my paralegal asked me, do I really need to download all of this? Because at that point, downloading the remainder would have filled up our entire hard drive. And so when I gave that notice, I was fully expecting that I was going to have a much more drawn out fight. I figured what would happen is they would designate those as privilege or attempt to. And then I would have to have a fight with the court of saying, look, I know there are things in there that they should have produced. And then that would have been a long, drawn out fight that would have occurred after the trial. But when defense counsel did not follow the Texas rules and designate those materials as privileged, and then all of those became in my possession, that was a manic scramble because that happened the day before Jones took the stand. So we knew that timing was the way it was going to work out, is we knew that if they didn't meet that deadline, it would be the night before. So basically everything that I did in Jones's cross-examination was done the night before. Some of it was actually done that morning because some of the things he was saying on his show before he took the stand. And so all of that came together at the last minute. You might think here we are 4 years into this case. I've deposed him 3 times. I've been thinking about how I'm going to cross him at trial forever. And what's interesting about that is literally nothing that I planned to ask him before trial ended up being what I asked him during the cross. Trial can be such a fluid place that it just changes day to day.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that. I didn't know. That's interesting. I didn't know it was that last minute. Can you explain why, what, in your opinion, how they let that happen? I know, and by the way, I am going to ask you the back and forth that you had with Andino Reynal. Before we even get to that, though,
Sure.
Just walk me through, how did they let that happen?
That's a really good question that I think is still getting answered. There have been show cause hearings up in Connecticut. There's still going to be some more proceedings to try to figure out exactly how this happened. There has been some affidavits filed recently that are pretty interesting about that apparently this entire cache of materials originated with their Connecticut lawyer, Norm Pattis, who has his own baggage and his own sordid history in this case. And then apparently that lawyer turned it over to a bankruptcy lawyer who I don't understand why should have had it. And then that bankruptcy lawyer turned it over to Andino Reynal. And Andino had no reason to have those materials. As we discussed in trial, it contained confidential psychiatric records of the plaintiffs up in Connecticut, which he has no business having. He had all of that material apparently from this affidavit through the summer. So this was well before trial. He had all this material. Why it was ever sent to me and my partner, I don't know. That is something we still cannot figure out. And why, when we notified, there was just a total, sort of abdication of his clients, the duties he has to his client to protect that material. We also don't know that. I mean, I speculated at the time of trial that I thought, well, this guy's a criminal attorney. He may not know his way around the civil rules, but this is so fundamental and basic that it was really surprising. We saw Roger Stone try to claim it was a conspiracy theory that maybe this guy intentionally did it on orders of the Eric Holder Justice Department that he used to work for. You get the silliest stuff. But I looking at what happened, I think that they dropped the ball in several ways. But the details of that are going to shake out over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, it was a moment. And I was curious when you confronted Alex Jones on the stand with it. We've been debating this back and forth. In your impression, because you were right there, do you think he knew? Do you think, in other words, do you think he knew what happened with his
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I actually don't think that the attorney at trial, Andino, I don't think he understood either. You got to remember, when they produced this over to us, it was about 360 gigs of material. So I'm not sure that he ever went in there and really verified what all was in there. So I think it really did hit for a surprise to everybody in the courtroom. What is most shocking to me, because now it's up on the Law&Crime network and I've watched it several times, of that moment, I am still shocked that I was able to get the entire question out with counsel not just jumping up and making noise. I don't care if you had a colorable objection or not, just make noise and stop the question. It was such an obvious, dramatic, moving moment. Why did you not stand up? The other thing I've noticed about that moment is y'all had a cameraman in the courtroom who was recording all of this. And I just want to say, that person deserves an Emmy for when they turned the camera and panned down to Andino Reynal during that question. It was like, it was quite a moment to see him just sitting there knowing that he was taking this. And then to have it turn back to Jones and say Perry Mason moment. In trial, at the moment that it's happening to me, you really are filled with the feeling of, I knew this was going to go well. I didn't know it could go this well. That's the feeling I had.
I'm going to show you something. And when I say this, I'm not advocating for this, but I just like your reaction to that. Someone sent that to me.
It's funny. I have been in high profile trials before. I have done some big work that got some coverage. Never at the end of the trial have I been bombarded with memes from around the internet. It has been really, really wild. We're actually, as a firm, we're collecting them all and putting them on a wall. We're having an Alex Jones wall, which will include photos and memes from the trial.
You have to tell me the relationship you had with Andino right now. It's felt very hostile, very volatile.
It is.
Explain to me what happened there.
I've been real open about this because I do, in most cases, enjoy a somewhat collegial relationship, even with attorneys who I think are not defending the best people. I have to deal with corporate lawyers all day, and they're not pleasant, but we try to get along. We try to stay civil. What happened with Andino, though, was a bit different because he showed up in the case at around March. He was taken over for the last lawyer. He's lawyer number 10. I'd already had a pretty nasty relationship with all the prior lawyers because, as you can imagine, what they would be willing to do. But Andino came to me in that March hearing and outside the courthouse came up to me and taunted me and said, "You're never going to get $1 for these parents. You're going to have to do a bunch of work. We're about to make your life hell." And what he was hinting at was that bankruptcy stunt back in April that delayed this trial. And of course, we quickly, took care of that bankruptcy and had that dismissed in 30 days, right back to trial. It was a silly threat to make. But there was something about somebody who was taking the amount of glee and the idea of not just defeating me, who he just barely met, but that I'm going to make sure that those parents never get $1, right? I could respect a lot of people who might come into this case and say, I'm going to defend Alex Jones on these principled grounds, X and Y. But to come in there and basically just be a bagman for Jones, say, I'm going to try to disrupt things, I'm going to try to embark on a bankruptcy, which everybody knows was BS, and to really take that glee in it, no, at that point, I had no respect for him, none whatsoever. And I think as a criminal lawyer, he may be used to the world where you can come in and you can represent the worst people when the powers of the state are arrayed against them. And certainly I have deep respect for that. That's what my father did in my entire life. But to see somebody do it in a civil case with parents in this way, it was so distasteful to me. And so it became very personal, very quick. So yeah, there is some bit of Schadenfreude and enjoyment on my part that after all of this taunting, after all, I mean, we're talking about a guy who flipped me off during trial and basically tried to get into a fight like he was in eighth grade, like stood up and got into my face. And I mean, like just ridiculous stuff.
What
And
was
to
that
know
about?
that entire time,
What was that about?
well, that was about the fact that I had just won a series of arguments which effectively foreclosed most of the evidence that he wanted to introduce at trial. Again, because he doesn't understand the civil rules. And he was extremely upset at that. And eventually just started calling us liars in front of the court, which the court dressed him down about. So he had a really bad day. And as soon as the judge left the room, he nearly got in a fight with me. And I had to exercise considerable restraint at that moment to stand back and say, hey, what is this guy doing? Everybody look, what is this guy up to? And you know, that's the point which he decided to flip me off in the middle of a courtroom, which is something that's never happened to me. So to see all that happen, all that aggression, all that hostility, all that venom, and then to have this moment, which not only am I able to have a viral moment of me cross-examining one of the most despicable defendants in recent memory, but also to have that be a showcase for his ineptitude, which ultimately made him a laughingstock on every late night comedy program. You don't get that kind of victory against opposing counsel in most cases. So yeah, it was very rewarding to have that happen.
Interesting you say that. When the punitive damages award came down, our cameras caught, I don't know, I don't think it was you, it was maybe another member of your team, but all looking over at their side as the numbers were coming down. I mean, that reaction to that number and that victory, what was that like?
Well, it's interesting because there you're talking about Wes, my partner, who was looking over at the table at them because they had taunted him earlier in the day, you know, and he was looking directly over at them, and I think feeling that moment where they had just done the crosses against each other or the closings against each other. In that moment, the moment it happened, I turned around and grabbed Neil and Scarlett's hands because it felt like, I don't know, after years of this coming and then to have it hit just that hard. I don't know. That was a really emotional moment for me. And that whole day ended up being really something out of a dream. You know, it was really, really a different day. I'd had, like I said, I've had big victories in the past before, but there was something so different about this. And to see, I don't know, to see almost, oh, I know my clients so well, to see a weight come off of them in that moment immediately, that was something. Because I got to tell you, the day before, they were thrilled with the verdict that came the day before, right? Because they knew we were shooting into the stratosphere, just as Andino said, to try to create an anchor, right? You try to get that number up as high as you can, so that when you have the advocate jurors on the other side who are pushing that number down, you know that's going to happen. What we didn't really know, and nobody knew, is how you value this case. And nobody knew. It could be anything. You could have a jury in there who thought that what InfoWars did was horrendous and that they deserve to be punished and these people should be paid money, and they'd give them $100,000 and say that was great. And you could have a jury who gives them $100 million, and somehow we landed right in the middle. But when they had the first verdict come in, to them, they said, look, giving us each $2 million, that's more money than most of these jurors are going to see in their lives, right? Like that's for purely emotional damage, no lost wages, no hard economic damages. Already getting a multi-million-dollar verdict, they said, okay, we did it. That's what we were here to do. When that next verdict came in, that was such a stunning repudiation of Jones and his entire message, his entire business operation. They felt like then, okay, now we're affecting other people. Now there are other media organizations who are going to take notice. So for them, it was, I can't tell you, as an attorney, to be able to deliver something like that to your clients, it's most meaningful victory I've ever had, for sure.
The compensatory damages, the little over 4 million, did the jury come back, and did you think they came back because they felt that whatever harm was sustained by Neil and Scarlett was what happened to them in the past? And you had said that nobody now believes what Alex Jones said about Sandy Hook, that there's not going to be future harm. I mean, how did you calculate and analyze the compensatory? We'll get to the punitive, but the compensatory damages.
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? Because you're right that by the time you're at trial, the litigation itself and the trial itself has already been so effective at shutting down Jones's conspiracy theory on this. So there is this idea of what are their damages into the future. When we talked to the jury, they didn't get so bogged down in that. They sort of had an idea in their head of what these compensatory damages are worth, and they had an argument between two sides of the jury. And one side wanting to press it down to make the idea of we should make the punitive damage larger to send that signal. And then you'll notice that that first verdict was a 10-2 verdict. There were two people who wouldn't sign that first verdict. And those two individuals wanted the compensatory damages to be far, far higher. The other members of the jury were willing to come down on the compensatory damages, knowing what they would do in the punitive phase. And so to some of the jurors, they felt like the compensatory damages were too low, but they were willing to balance that out with the punitive damages. All of the jurors expressed the issue that I think every personal injury lawyer faces with these kinds of cases, which is how exactly do you calculate emotional damages? If you don't have a price tag on it, how do you do it? You're just making numbers up out of thin air. And we tried to give them some metaphors to do that, but basically they just did what they felt right. And I had always said that I don't know how to value this case, but I do know that whatever number those 12 Austin jurors come up with, that's going to be the right number. And so right now, I think 50 million total as a damage is the right number. And if we start pulling that forward for the 8 Lafferty plaintiffs, then when I come back and I try the case with Mr. Posner and Mrs. De La Rosa, and then we have Marcel Fontaine's case after that, by the time you're through all these verdicts, yeah, Jones is done. These will wipe him out. That's going to happen. And as we get into the bankruptcy, who knows exactly what new revelations are going to come out there. So it's going to be a long, dangerous road for Mr. Jones over the next year.
Let's get into that. So first, there's a cap, right, of punitive damages in Texas, but you correct me, you are fighting that. Can you walk me
Correct.
through how that works? Because again, that's my understanding of Texas law. There's usually a cap. You're
right.
saying constitutionally it might not work.
Well, there's a lot of arguments against this cap. And we have a motion for entry of judgment filed right now. And thus far, defendants in their answer haven't pled the cap and they haven't moved to apply the cap, but they will. That's going to happen before this judgment hearing. And so we're going to be replying on the several bases by which we're going to challenge the cap. I don't want to give away too much of the store before I do that. Clearly, there's a compelling constitutional argument, but that would be if we were going to challenge the cap as to basically all cases under this posture. But there are exceptions and exceptions to the caps that are case specific. And in this case, there are case specific exceptions to the cap. And so we're going to be pursuing those. The sort of interesting thing, though, about where this is all heading is because these are in bankruptcy. They filed bankruptcy mid-trial. As soon as judgment is entered, there becomes a stay on the case and we go back to bankruptcy court. In other words, the defendant will not immediately notice of appeal and take it through state court appeals. In fact, the idea that this will ever go to state court appeals is pretty low. What will happen is because Jones wants a resolution. So when all these cases are done, he's going to try to get that resolved in his favor in the bankruptcy court. That will involve valuing the cases and what their potential appeals might be worth. It's basically a whole process where the bankruptcy court itself establishes the final value of the claim, even though the claims are still pending on appeal or could possibly have appeals. All of that could work out in a way that would be to Mr. Jones's benefit and where he could get the court to discharge his obligations for a very low amount of money under the bankruptcy estate. More likely, though, what we believe is going to happen is that once we start putting genuine financial scrutiny on Mr. Jones, the entire sham is going to come apart. And if that happens, and it happens in a pretty spectacular way, then either ending in the bankruptcy court is not going to be good for him. And I don't see us going for years of appeals. I don't see Mr. Jones has any interest in doing that either. So it really becomes about getting the judgment to the bankruptcy court and then the parties fighting over what those judgments mean. And in this case, we'll be fighting over 4 different judgments that are coming in off these defamation cases. So it's going to be an interesting next few months for sure.
I guess the question is when do you think your clients would actually get paid? And I guess it's a complicated question.
It really is. I mean, it could be very, very soon if things go cataclysmically for Mr. Jones. I mean, we could be talking about collecting money from him by the start of next year. More likely, though, it's going to be some pretty extended litigation over this. And I think the real earliest practicalities of collection, even if you were resolving it to the bankruptcy court, is something like next summer. But then again, things could go totally haywire like they often do in this case. And we could be chasing this down for the next couple of years. Whatever it's going to take, we're in it for the long haul. There's no doubt about that.
And what do Scarlett and Neil want to do with the money?
Huh, that's interesting. You know, we were precluded at trial by motion in limine as to telling the jury what they wanted to do with the money. But I think the jury understood that Scarlett's charity is very important to both of them. That Scarlett's already doing quite a lot of good work. She's in a lot of schools giving free emotional social intelligence curriculum to those schools. Once we start putting Mr. Jones money to use on that, yeah, it's going to change kids' lives. And so instead of having those cases, and there are plenty of cases where this is true, where people are grievously injured, and the best thing you can do for them is just turn their lives into luxury, and to where they never have to lift a finger again. But that's not what Scarlett and Neil want to do. And they feel, yeah, if they're able to collect a substantial amount of money from Mr. Jones, they want to put it to good use. And so I'm really glad they're the people that they are, because it's a really poetic end to the story, that this money that Jones basically grifted off of people to sell them these supplements will actually be put to good use.
I know we have a few minutes left. I wanted to get some more other points in. And first, I wanted to ask you about the moment when Jones goes up to Neil and Scarlett in the courtroom. You were right there for that. What was your reaction?
It was weird. Anything that Jones does, he's doing it for performance. It's all just a performance, right? And so this was clearly engineered to be to his benefit. But at the same time, my clients are classy people. If he wants to come up and try to shake his hand and say he's sorry, they're going to let him do that. But that's not what he did. He came up to them and again offered his condolences, and then started yelling at them that you're being lied to, you're being shown false information. These people, and it was all just to try to rattle them or do whatever he could to them. So it was actually then that my partner Wes stepped in and split it up and said, no, this is not happening. You don't get to do this. This is not something that you're allowed to do. So we got them apart. The following day, actually, Jones brought them letters, handwritten letters, which did not appear to be his handwriting, but they were basically the same thing. As I offer my condolences, and I'm sorry you're being manipulated and lied to, and all this kind of stuff. But that was all performance for Jones. I mean, it's all bullshit. There's no truth behind any of that. I mean, Jones doesn't care about these people. He cares about what his appearance might be in this moment, and so that's all that was.
Yeah, it was an interesting moment, to say the least. And then, there was again not a ton of memorable moments from him. Do you think he was chewing gum?
No,
he actually had
no, I don't. I'm a little. I don't know what was going on there, but I don't think it was gum. And yeah, I don't want to speculate about what I think was going on there, but the like acting like a 4-year-old to stand up and be like, do you want to look inside my mouth? See, look inside my mouth. Look, oh God, what was going on there? And it's the trial is so full of those that you have this Perry Mason moment that gets all this attention, but you forget this is the same trial where Jones has video being played where he accuses the judge of being a pedophile. He calls the jurors a bunch of blue collar yokels who don't know what planet they're on. I mean, it's all these things keep happening in this trial. You've got his head producer saying that she says under oath, yeah, I think this trial is pretty much staged. If any of those things happen in any other trial, they're top level stories. But here it was just a circus from start to end. And what I'm most proud of my team in all of this is Bill, Wes, Kyle, and I knew that when we came into this, the joking's over. A lot of times earlier in this case, there's some humor to it because these people are so absurd and ridiculous, and you can have some fun with them, embarrassing them. But once this trial started, it became deadly serious. And I'm really proud of my team as to maintaining the correct atmosphere in the face of all that circus. That there was very clear there were two sides of the room handling this case very differently. And to not get sucked into a circus, I'm really proud of everybody. We did it the right way.
So what can we expect from the next trial?
The next one's going to be really interesting. The next one, which involves Lenny Posner and Veronique De La Rosa, they were sort of Jones's original victims. Lenny's been fighting this longer than anybody, and he really has taken the brunt of it. His damages are far worse than any other parents are. He's had to move 7 times because he became the lightning rod. He was the guy who tried to stand up to Jones. Jones took that personally. It really started a vendetta with him. That trial was going to be a nice bookend for it all. We're going to have this Lafferty trial in the middle, and that's a big group of plaintiffs. And also a really interesting one is the FBI officer who was defamed, and he's only seeking $1 for Jones. He just wants to clear his name. That trial is going to be enormous and have so many angles to it. And then sort of the last bookend to it is going to be Lenny and Veronique. And I think that trial We're hoping to have that back in court before the end of the year. So we're hoping November, December, something like that. This Lafferty case is going to get tried in September. So there's still a lot more of the story to be told here. We said when this verdict came down, it's the end of the beginning, because there really is, there's a lot more that's about to happen in the downfall of Alex Jones.
We have about 2 minutes left. I want to ask you one final thing, and that, of course, is my understanding is you have sent Alex Jones's text messages to the January 6th committee. Is there any way you could expand upon that about what happened there?
No, absolutely not. Can't do that. Come on now. No, it's the January 6th committee. No, all I can say is that in here, now I try to say this more and more publicly as I can. At the time we got these text messages, we know that they were created in May of 2021. Is that when they were scraped off the phone? The actual date range, though, ends at about mid 2020. That being said, that did not diminish the January 6th committee's interest in the text messages. So we have turned those over. I have gotten also requests from other law enforcement agencies who wanted to see them. Those texts are going to be interesting also to the bankruptcy court. There's a very good possibility they're going to be interesting in Mr. Jones' family law proceedings. There is a lot going on in those text messages. So I can tell you the story of that is not over either.
That's all I was curious to know. Mark Bankston, absolute pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And as I said, as a lawyer, as an anchor here on the Law&Crime Network, it was great to watch that unfold, and great work. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. And, thank you to all y'all at Law&Crime for trying to shed more light on the legal system and for everything y'all do that way.
I appreciate that. Again, I think it was important to not only show this legal story, but also to show the story of what happened to Jesse, what happened at Sandy Hook. If we were able to show that a little bit more and expand the coverage of that, that was a hope for us as well. So, Mark, thank you so much.
Hey, I appreciate it.